what were you telling me? So you cannot greet. You have to wait for me to sit down first before you greet me. We are now age mates, Abi. Yeah, though, you do well. So, what were you telling me?
Tell us about the Spanish flu.
Oh, the Spanish flu. It's a long time ago. Century, like almost a century. But let me just tell you the story. 100 years ago, the world was recovering from a global war that had killed over 20 million people. And then, it suddenly had to contend with something even more deadlier. A flu outbreak. One so deadly it shook the four corners of the earth. The pandemic happened when vital public resources had all been diverted into military efforts during the war, with little to no resources to tackle the new enemy. The pandemic was thought to have happened in training camps. That's the army training camps, so on the Western Front. And the unsanitary conditions helped incubate the spread of the virus. After the war, returning soldiers around the world in crowded ships and trains spread the disease to the general public, especially those in densely crowded cities. In many places, only the rich and the middle class could afford to visit a doctor. So you can imagine what happened to the other people. The flu killed many people in slums and urban areas with poor nutrition and sanitary conditions. People with underlying health conditions were not spared though. Between 50 to about 100 million people were said to have died. See, no pandemic has been as deadly nor as far-reaching. Some states imposed quarantines, ordered citizens to wear face masks. Public places were shut down, including schools, churches, and theaters. There was virtually nothing working in the cities. People were advised to avoid shaking hands. They were advised to stay indoors. Libraries put a halt to lending books, and spitting was banned. According to the New York Times, during the pandemic, Boy Scouts in New York City approached people they see spitting on the streets and gave them cards that read, "You are in violation of the sanitary code." Because citizens in San Francisco were fined $5 if they were caught in public places without face masks and charged with disturbing the peace of the society. Now, I know you will ask me, what exactly caused the Spanish flu? Well, the 1980 flu was observed in Europe, America, and other areas of Asia before spreading to every area of the planet within a matter of months. But still, till today, its origin is yet unknown. Despite the fact that the 1918 flu isn't isolated to one place, it became known around the world as Spanish flu because Spain was hit hard by the disease, that medical professionals advise patients to take up to 30 grams of aspirin per day to alleviate symptoms. Today, medical consensus says those above 4 grams are toxic and unsafe. Many believe the October deaths were actually caused or hastened by aspirin poisoning. And would you blame them? The flu wiped out families, left countless widows and orphans in its wake. Funeral parlors were overwhelmed and bodies piled up so much that many people had to dig graves for their own family members. The flu hit so hard, it was also detrimental to the economy. Businesses were forced to shut down because so many employees were very sick. Basic services such as mail delivery and garbage collections were hindered due to the flu stricken workers. Some places lacked farm workers to harvest crops. States and local health departments closed for business, hampering the efforts to chronicle the spread of the flu. People really died though. People really died. You all were lucky you were not born then.
Sorry, favorite drama Uzi.
So, as I was saying, doctors describe the Spanish flu as the greatest medical holocaust in history. But one unusual aspect of the flu was that it struck down previously healthy young people, including members of the World War I. See, more US soldiers died from the flu than they died during the war. Yes, I know that one. Normally, a healthy immune system can deal reasonably well with the flu, but this version struck quickly that it overwhelmed the immune system, causing massive overreaction in the body, flooding the lungs with fluids, which became the perfect reservoir for secondary infections. What does that mean? Well, interestingly, older people were susceptible. Susceptible. Don't mind my English, is all dead. Oh, my children. Older people were not susceptible, perhaps because they had survived very similar strain of flu, which had started to spread through human population in the 1930s. By the summer of 1919, the flu pandemic came to an end, as those that were infected either died or developed immunity. So all these things have been saying were what happened outside Africa and outside Nigeria. So now let me tell you what happened in Africa and in Nigeria. Pay attention. The severity of the pandemic's toll was particularly acute in Africa, much of which was under colonial administration. Nearly 2% of Africa's population was estimated to have died within 6 months, which is about 2.5 million out of the estimated 130 million people. The pandemic's impact on South Africa is particularly notable, as it was one of the 5 worst hit in the world. Roughly 5% of South Africa's population perished. When the Spanish flu emerged in West Africa, the speed at which the virus ravaged Freetown, Sierra Leone, was staggering. 4% of Freetown's population died in just 3 weeks. In East Africa, the pandemic killed 4 to 6% of Kenya's population in 9 months. That in many parts of the continent, medical facilities were overwhelmed in August 1918. There was no space to keep people. The deadly flu arrived in sub-Saharan Africa via the seaport of West Africa and spread like wildfire through Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, the Gambia, and Cameroon. In Lagos, health authorities resorted to issuing government medical pass in order to monitor and trace infected individuals. But the number of cases increased and the system became too hard to manage. A mass exodus began. The colonial government then appealed to local chiefs and used the Nigerian Pioneer newspaper to urgently request that people cooperate with health authorities. Similarly, in Lagos, the most successful efforts occurred when the British doctors called a meeting to listen to the suggestions of African medical practitioners who were otherwise excluded from colonial service on the basis of race. Among other measures, this led to printing and circulating preventive guidelines in Yoruba and in English. Many regions in Africa experienced famine or near famine conditions due to the disruption to food production in 1918. In Nigeria, there was a switch to cassava instead of yam, given that the former could be grown all year round and also was less labor intensive. In other parts of Africa, new varieties of quick-growing maize and beans were introduced to avoid future famines. As for me, that time I was with my baba, we self-isolated, and that was what resulted to all the children and grandchildren we have today. I thank God Ogeneme for keeping me and my family and every other person that survived the 1918 pandemic flu. It was not something to joke about at all.